She laughed first. That was the part one would never forget. Not a quiet snicker. Not a polite, restrained smile behind a champagne flute. No. It was loud, deliberate, and designed to carry across the room. Sharp enough to cut through the string quartet, sharp enough to turn heads, sharp enough to land exactly where she intended it to land. Right on me. Oh wow, she said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of sweetness that has nothing sweet inside it. She tilted her head. She let her eyes drop to my necklace, the way you look at something you found on the bottom of your shoe. That is cute. Is it from a souvenir shop? Like one of those little airport kiosks? A few people laughed. Not everyone. Just enough to make the silence of the rest feel loud. I smiled. I did not say a word. I just smiled, lifted my glass of sparkling water. I do not drink at corporate events, never have, and held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds longer than was comfortable. And then, from across the ballroom, I watched the moment everything changed. Theodore Ashworth, founder, chairman, and one of the most feared men in global finance, was mid-conversation near the far end of the room. He was laughing about something, the way rich men laugh at galas, with their whole chest and no real feeling. And then his eyes drifted across the crowd the way eyes do at parties, lazy and unfocused. Until they were not. Until they landed on my necklace. And Theodore Ashworth stopped moving entirely. The glass in his hand stilled. His laugh died. I watched his face do something I had never seen a man like him do in public. It went pale. Not uncomfortable pale. Not surprised pale. The kind of pale that only comes when something you did not expect to be real is suddenly, undeniably, standing right in front of you. He crossed the room in 11 steps. I counted. He moved through clusters of executives and their spouses like they were furniture, never stopping, never excusing himself, just moving. When he reached me, he looked directly at the necklace. Then he looked at me. Why are you wearing that here? His voice was low. Almost a whisper. But the people standing nearest to us heard every syllable. The room went quiet the way rooms do when something important is happening, and no one is sure yet what it is. And then the screen goes black. Let me take you back. Because none of this makes sense without the beginning, and the beginning is the part that most people in that ballroom did not know. My name is Adrienne Soleil. I am 31 years old. I was born in Chicago to a mother who cleaned hospital floors on the night shift and a father who drove a delivery truck for 22 years without a single sick day. They were not wealthy. They were not connected. But they were deliberate, the kind of parents who taught you that the quality of your thinking mattered more than the label on your clothes, and that real power rarely announces itself. I went to school on a merit scholarship. I finished at the top of my class. I spent my 20s working in corporate restructuring, the kind of work most people find unglamorous because it involves reading documents nobody wants to read and finding the numbers that powerful people hope you will not find. I was good at it. Quietly, consistently, stubbornly good at it. And over time, through a series of careful decisions and one significant inheritance from a great uncle most of my family had barely spoken to, I built something. Not a title. Not a corner office. A position. Specifically, a majority shareholding position in Solaris Group International, one of the largest privately held infrastructure and logistics conglomerates in North America. Most people in corporate circles had never heard my name. That was intentional. I had spent years building my stake quietly, buying shares through holding companies, working through intermediaries, letting other people's noise fill the room while I did the real work in the margin. By the time the board voted to formalize my controlling interest, I had more leverage over that company than anyone except the people who had been there since the very beginning. The necklace was not just jewelry. Or rather, it was technically, but that was not the point. It was a private insignia piece. A small, almost architectural pendant in white gold with a single inset stone, designed specifically for the controlling owners of Solaris Group's parent entity. There were fewer than 5 people in the world who had one. It was never advertised. It was never referenced in any press release. If you did not already know what it meant, you would look at it and think exactly what the VP's daughter thought. That it came from an airport kiosk. My mother always said, "Wear your power quietly. Let other people wear the noise. I thought about her every single time I put that necklace on. She never saw me wear it. She passed the year before the vote. But I wore it for her every time I walked into a room where people like her were not supposed to belong. Solaris Group was celebrating a major merger, a 9-figure deal that had been in negotiation for almost 2 years. The event was held at the Aldwyn Ballroom in Midtown Manhattan, one of those venues that exist specifically for the purpose of making business feel like art. Crystal chandeliers, a live string quartet, waitstaff in white gloves carrying things on silver trays. The guest list was a careful combination of executives, board members, legacy investors, and select partners. I arrived alone. I always arrive alone to these things. I wore a simple navy dress, low heels, and the necklace. Nothing else notable. I had been to enough of these events to know that the people worth talking to are the ones who are not trying to be seen, the ones standing slightly apart from the main crowd, holding their drinks with both hands, watching. I found a quiet spot near one of the tall windows and spent the first 40 minutes just observing. That is a habit of mine. You learn more about an organization in the first hour of a social event than you do in 6 months of board meetings. People are less careful when there is champagne involved. Raymond Holt was there. He was the executive vice president of Solaris Group's North American division, a man who had been with the company for 18 years and had spent most of those years carefully constructing a very particular image of himself. Competent, loyal, essential. The kind of man who made sure everyone in every room knew he had been there since before the renovation. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and a habit of talking with his hands that I had always found subtly aggressive. I had been watching Raymond for months. Not personally, I had a team for that, but the reports that came across my desk told a consistent story. A pattern of executive entitlement. Complaints from junior staff about dismissive behavior. 2 formal HR filings in 3 years, both of them quietly resolved. And recently, credible intelligence suggesting that he had been working to delay and complicate the shareholder vote that would formalize my majority position. He had not succeeded. But the attempt mattered. His daughter, Portia Holt, was his guest for the evening. She was 26, freshly finished with a graduate program in fashion business, and from everything I had observed in the first 20 minutes after her arrival, she was determined to make an impression. She had on a designer gown that cost more than my first car, a diamond choker that could have funded a semester of graduate tuition, and the particular confidence of someone who has never had to wonder whether she belonged in a room. She spotted me about 30 minutes into the evening. I saw her see me. I watched her eyes do the calculation, that quick, unconscious assessment that some people perform the moment they identify someone they have decided is beneath them. She took in the simple dress, the minimal jewelry, the fact that I was standing alone near the window. And she walked over with a smile already arranged on her face. "Hi," she said, warmly but not genuinely. "I do not think we have met. I am Portia. My father is Raymond Holt. He basically runs the North American side of things here." "I know who Raymond is," I said. She paused for just a fraction of a second. Not long enough to be obvious. Long enough for me to catch it. "Right, of course, everyone knows Dad." She laughed lightly. "And you are?" "Adrian," I said. I did not add anything else. I have learned that silence, offered at the right moment, is one of the most powerful tools a person can use. Most people cannot tolerate it. They rush to fill it. They give you everything. Portia was no exception. "So what do you do?" she asked. "Are you in legal? You have that kind of..." She gestured vaguely in my direction, as if my entire presentation constituted a category. Understated thing going on. "I am in ownership," I said simply. She laughed. Not because it was funny. Because she did not understand it, and laughing was how she covered that. "Cute," she said. And then her eyes dropped to my necklace, and the smile shifted into something sharper. "Oh, that is interesting. Where is that from?" "It is very minimal." "It was given to me," I said. She studied it for another moment. Then she turned slightly toward 2 women who had drifted into our orbit, both wives of board members, and pitched her voice just loud enough to be social. I think it is kind of sweet when people dress up pieces like that. Very charming. Very airport gift shop energy. One of the women gave a small, polite laugh. The other looked away. I felt absolutely nothing in my chest. That was the important part. I had done enough work on myself, on my reactions, on the discipline of refusing to let someone else's smallness make you small. That moments like this landed flat. I looked at Portia Holt and I felt the way you feel when you are watching a child throw a toy. Mild. Curious. Completely unbothered. Some people talk before they think, I said pleasantly. Her smile tightened. Just slightly. What followed was a slow and increasingly expensive escalation. Portia did not let it go. That was her defining mistake of the evening, and I think some part of her knew it, which is exactly why she kept pushing, because the moment you sense that something is not landing the way you intended, the temptation is always to push harder rather than stop. It is a very human error. And it is a very costly one. She found her way back into my orbit twice more. Both times with comments framed as casual observations. Both times designed to position me as someone who had wandered into a room she had no business being in. The second time, she materialized near me while I was speaking briefly with one of the logistics partners. She waited for a natural pause in the conversation, and then, loudly enough for the cluster of nearby executives to hear clearly, she said, "I hope you are not too cold in that. The ballroom gets drafty, and when you are wearing something that light." She shrugged with a practiced sympathy that had no feeling behind it. "I always say, dress for the event you are actually at." I looked at her. "I am comfortable," I said. "Thank you." She smiled. Held it. Decided to go one step further. "If you cannot afford diamonds, just say that," she said lightly, adding that laugh at the end, the one designed to make cruelty sound like casual observation, like a joke between friends. No judgment. Some invitations are aspirational. The room went to that particular contained kind of tense, the specific social discomfort that happens when a group of people simultaneously registers that something unkind has just been said and no one is sure whether to acknowledge it or pretend they missed it. From 2 feet to my left, a board member named Arthur Fenwick, 73 years old, on the Solaris board since before the company had its current name, cleared his throat in the slow, deliberate way of a man who has never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be heard. "Back in my day," he said, unhurried, "we made a point of finding out who owned the building before deciding who did not belong in it." The laughter that followed was real. A handful of board members. 2 of the senior partners. One of the executives let out a single sharp exhale of laughter and looked at his shoes, the way people laugh when something is both funny and true and slightly uncomfortable. Portia kept her smile in place. But something behind her eyes went very still. And across the room, Raymond Holt had witnessed the entire exchange. I watched him watch it from 15 feet away. His face registered it. He processed it. And he did nothing. He picked up a fresh glass of champagne and turned back to his conversation, as if the whole thing were someone else's problem in someone else's room. That was the moment I made my final decision about Raymond Holt. Not because of what his daughter had said. Because of what he chose not to do when it was his moment to say something. Leadership is not about the bold moves. It is about what you allow in the quiet moments. And Raymond had just told me everything. Theodore Ashworth had been working his way through the room all evening, doing what hosts do at events like this. Brief conversations, handshakes, the careful performance of attention that people in his position have refined over decades. I had met him once before briefly, at a preliminary meeting 3 months earlier. He knew who I was. He knew about the pending shareholder vote. What he did not know, because very few people did, was that the vote had already taken place. The board had met in closed session the previous afternoon. The outcome was scheduled for formal announcement the following week. Tonight was not supposed to be about that. But Theodore saw the necklace. And Theodore had been in this business long enough to know exactly what that necklace meant. When he crossed the room and stopped in front of me, his voice was quiet. Private. But the crowd nearest to us had not dispersed, and in a room that had grown gradually more attentive, quiet carried. "Why are you wearing that here?" he asked. "Because it belongs to me," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked across the room toward Raymond Holt, who had gone very still in a way that had nothing to do with composure. "The vote," Theodore said. Low. "Careful. It already happened?" "Yesterday," I said. 17-3. Something moved through Theodore's expression, not quite relief, not quite disbelief, but something in the narrow space between them. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "Raymond does not know the result," I said. "He knew the vote was scheduled," Theodore said carefully. "He did not know the outcome." He paused. I waited. "He tried to delay it," he added quietly. I had already known that. Hearing him confirm it did not change anything, but it settled something. Theodore turned to the room then. Not dramatically. Not with any performance. With the simple, clean decisiveness of a man who has made up his mind and sees no reason to delay. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," he said. The quartet faded. The conversations paused. 200 people turned toward the center of the ballroom, and the only sound left in the entire room was the faint, soft settling of fabric. Theodore spoke for less than 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes rearranged the entire architecture of everything. He announced the completion of the merger. He spoke briefly about the company's direction. And then, with the careful precision of someone who understands exactly how to drop something significant into a room and let it find its own level, he said that the Solaris parent entity had completed its shareholder restructuring. "Effective as of yesterday afternoon," he said, "Adrienne Soleil holds majority controlling interest in the parent entity. She holds final authority over executive leadership and strategic direction across all divisions. This is not a pending development or a future announcement. This is current and binding." He paused for exactly the right amount of time. "The necklace she is wearing tonight is the private insignia given exclusively to controlling owners of the parent entity. If you were not aware of its significance before this moment, you are now." The silence that followed had texture. It had actual, physical weight. I watched it move across Portia Holt's face in real time, the sequence of expressions that people cannot control when the floor shifts beneath them. Confusion first. Then the slow building structure of understanding. Then the specific, stomach-dropping recognition of someone who has just fully grasped the size of the error they have made. She went completely still. Raymond had set his champagne glass down on the nearest surface. He was looking at me with an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral and landing somewhere far closer to stricken. His jaw was set. Behind his eyes I could see the rapid private calculation of a man counting the full cost of every decision he had made in the past several months. Arthur Fenwick, to my left, raised his glass in a small quiet toast in my direction. I nodded once. Theodore was still not finished. "I also want to address something that some of you may not have been aware of going into this evening," he said, his tone even and unhurried throughout. "Over the past several months, the board has been conducting a quiet internal review of leadership culture within this company. We received a significant number of reports from staff, formal complaints and informal accounts, documenting patterns of executive behavior, entitlement, dismissiveness, conduct that does not belong in an organization that intends to lead its industry for the next generation." He did not look at Raymond when he said it. He did not need to. This evening was, in part, a social evaluation. How people conduct themselves when they believe no one important is watching tells you considerably more about their character than any formal performance review ever will. The weight in the room intensified. "Raymond," Theodore said, and now he did look at him directly, steadily, without apology, "you will receive a formal communication from the board by end of business Monday. Pending that review, consider your executive decision-making authority temporarily suspended." Raymond said nothing. He stood completely still. I think in that moment, he had genuinely forgotten how to move. The room broke back into conversation the way water resumes flowing after something heavy has been dropped into it, carefully at first, and then all at once. I moved back toward the tall windows and stood there with my sparkling water, watching people recalibrate. There was a different energy in the room now. More careful. more aware. Portia found me 20 minutes later. She came alone, without the borrowed confidence of the crowd, without the armor of the evening's earlier momentum. She looked genuinely smaller. Not physically. In the way that actually matters. I did not know, she said. Her voice was quieter than it had been all night. Stripped of the performance. I genuinely did not know who you were. I was not trying to. I understand that, I said. She waited. I could see her hoping for more, an absolution, a reassurance that the evening could be repackaged into something she could live with more comfortably. I gave her something more useful instead. Not knowing is not the same as being harmless, I said. You looked at me and decided, in 30 seconds, what I was worth. You did not ask. You did not wonder. You just decided, and then you performed that decision in front of a room full of people. Twice. I paused. My grandmother used to say, if you do not know the recipe, do not criticize the cook. You did not know the recipe tonight, Portia. You never even looked for it. She opened her mouth. Closed it. The issue was never the necklace, I said. The issue was the instinct. Where it comes from. What it says about how you have learned to move through a room and decide, at a glance, who deserves your respect and who does not. I held her gaze. I was not cruel about it. I was not performing composure for the room's benefit. I looked at her the way you look at someone you genuinely hope will leave the evening thinking differently than they arrived. You are 26, I said. That is not a verdict. It is just information you can choose to use. She did not answer. I did not wait for one. I picked up my glass and walked toward Arthur Fenwick, who was waiting with a dry expression and what turned out to be a very good story about a remarkably similar situation at a company dinner in 1989. Before the evening ended, Theodore asked me to say a few words to the room. I had not planned to speak. I am not drawn to speeches as a form. I find that most speeches at events like this say less than they could because the person giving them is more concerned with how they are landing than with what they are actually trying to say. But I stood in the center of that ballroom, with the chandeliers above me and 200 people watching, and I said what I actually believed. I said that quiet leadership is not passive leadership. That the people who build the most durable things are rarely the loudest ones in the room. That humility is not a performance, it is a daily practice, one that requires you to stay genuinely curious about other people rather than spending your energy convincing them that you matter. I said that real wealth. And I meant this in the broadest possible sense, not only the financial kind, does not require validation from a room. It does not need to be recognized in order to be real. The moment you need a room full of people to confirm your worth, you have already given that room too much power over you. I said that the most honest thing about any leader is not their strategy, not their track record, not even their decisions under the most visible pressure. It is how they treat someone when they believe that person has nothing to offer them. That moment. That instinct. That is where character actually lives. I did not look at Portia when I said it. I did not look at Raymond. I looked at the junior staff and event coordinators near the back of the room, the people who had been working the edges of the evening all night long, making everything function, being looked through by almost everyone in attendance. I looked at them, and I spoke directly to them. And when I finished, the applause that came was not polite or obligatory. It started slowly, from Arthur Fenwick and a small cluster of board members, and then it spread through the room like something that had been waiting a long time for permission to exist. The kind of applause that happens when a room full of people feel that something true has been said out loud in a space where truth does not usually get much air. Raymond caught me in the lobby as I was waiting for my car. He was alone. Without the champagne, without the architecture of the evening supporting him, he looked like a different man entirely. Older. Quieter. The carefully constructed version of himself had run completely out of material. Adrian, he said. I want you to know, what Portia did tonight had nothing to do with me. I had no idea she was going to conduct herself that way. That is not how I raised her. Raymond, I said. He stopped. You stood 15 feet away from your daughter while she publicly humiliated a guest at a company event. I said. Not once. Twice. You heard it. You watched it happen. And you turned back to your conversation. He started to respond. I continued. I do not need you to explain Portia's choices, I said. I need you to sit with your own. Because the moment a leader decides that something is not their problem to address, that is the precise moment they stop leading. You let it happen. And that tells me more about how you have been running your division than anything in any performance file. His jaw worked. His eyes were careful and exhausted and trying very hard to hold on to something. The board is going to look at your record, I said. I'm not going to direct what they find. But I will tell you this, and I want you to hear it clearly, there may still be a path forward for you at this company. Whether that path exists depends entirely on what you choose to do in the coming months. Not what you say. What you actually do. I held his gaze for a moment. I meant every word. I was not performing grace and I was not withholding mercy. I was giving him the truth, which was the only thing standing in that lobby that was genuinely useful to either of us. My car pulled up to the curb. I opened the door myself, the way I always do. You will hear from the board on Monday, I said. Use the weekend well. The door closed. The car moved away from the Aldwyn Ballroom and into the Manhattan night, and I sat in the back seat and watched the city move past the windows, and I felt, for the first time all evening, the quiet that comes after a long day of being exactly who you are without apology and without performance. The next morning I was at my desk by 7 with a cup of coffee and grey winter light coming through the window when my assistant forwarded me the first headline. Youngest female majority shareholder reshapes corporate leadership at Solaris Group International. I read it once. Set my phone face down on the desk. Picked up my coffee. On my desk, next to my laptop, I kept a photograph of my mother. She was in her hospital scrubs in the photo, standing in our kitchen at 2 in the morning after a long night shift, laughing at something my father had just said. She looked tired and radiant and completely, entirely herself, the way people look when they are not performing anything for anyone. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I touched the necklace at my throat, that small white gold almost invisible piece that most of the world would walk right past without a second glance, and I got back to work. Because that is what real power does. It does not wait for a room to notice. It does not need one. It just keeps going. As we come to the end of this episode, I see you, I appreciate you. Like and also drop your thoughts in the comments before leaving.